Hey, this is Kris with ROI Asset and Property Management, and today we're here to talk about HOA and asset management.
So what is HOA management?
So HOAs and HOA management, we all know what HOAs are and we hear the horror stories online. So when a development goes in and they have certain CC&Rs, which is basically rules for operating inside of those developments, they generally put together an HOA, a homeowners association, to manage the rules of that development. And what HOA management is me working with the elected residents of that development and enforcing the CC&Rs. So that can look like just owning and managing the HOA meetings and helping to elect a fair HOA system, all the way to, of course, the enforcement of the CC&Rs, making sure garbage cans get pulled in, lawns are mowed, etc. So for HOA management, the bare minimum you look for is just the management of the meetings themselves. You take meeting notes, you schedule meetings, you send out notices. Once the meeting is resolved, if there are any points that the HOA management team want you to enforce, you enforce them and on from there. Usually the HOA management side for the meetings themselves, that's usually just a flat fee. But if we're going out and we're doing enforcement, we're doing vendor management, like making sure the common areas are mowed, making sure if there's any work that needs to be done on, piping or any of the community services that are there. Sometimes there's a pool as part of the HOA, that gets cleaned, stuff like that. We would take that on, and then you would see a per door cost anywhere from a couple of dollars to $20 or $30, depending on the size and complexity of the HOA. But with that, we work with the HOA management. The HOA management is basically our boss. They go to the meetings, they dictate what's going on in those meetings in the CC&Rs, and they validate with us that they're interpreting those CC&Rs correctly. So if it says garbage cans are supposed to be put away after garbage comes through, we talk to them and say, by the way, you can't enforce this the day of or the day after garbage goes through. You need to give them a little bit of time, like a 48-hour notice to get those put in, so that they're behind the gates, etc. And then we would drive the community and we would write down a list of offenders and we would hand that to the HOA board. They would then choose to do with that data what they wanted to. Our recommendation is always, hey, if we're doing this every month or every other month, keep a log of what's going on. Talk with the residents, which we are happy to do, because we don't have skin in the game when it comes to that complex nature that is being residents. Our job is to simply enforce the CC&Rs. But garbage is just one of the many things that you can have in there. I know in my HOA we have building sizes, color specific. Yeah, garbage cans are supposed to be behind a fenced area. But our HOA it's not enforced right now because we haven't built up to the level we need to enforce it. But once again, back to the HOA management bit, it's about working with whoever the board members are, whenever they rotate, in understanding HOA management, the impact on the residents that you're going to have, especially if you're too heavy-handed or too light-handed, and then obviously the enforcement if that's needed. And in most cases, enforcement is not needed. It's usually just a subtle reminder. Other times it's sending emails out to let the community know what's going on, sending emails out to schedule the meetings, to schedule like a barbecue for everyone that's in that community, or scheduling notices of, hey, we're turning the pump off for all of the irrigation because it needs to be repaired. And then, of course, communicating the budget, because we'll keep track of the budget of the overall HOA costs and whatnot and put it into a T12 like we would do with any of our properties.
So what is the difference, a main difference between in-house and hiring you?
Usually in-house is individuals that are not familiar with HOA management. They're not familiar with how to enforce CC&Rs, and they're generally not familiar with how to interpret those CC&Rs. So we give them the advice they need to. If they want to manage it in-house, fantastic. We'll help them run their meeting. We'll help them do their board elections. We'll help them with as little or as much as they want. Obviously, varying rates for the level of effort. But most individuals don't wake up in the morning and go to work and say, I want to be on the HOA board. They do it because they feel there's a necessity there, and we help them understand what their roles are for that so they can be good HOA board members. Once again, we hear the horror stories about someone on the HOA board that's just gone crazy. We try and eliminate that by being professional individuals that come into an environment. And once again, we don't have skin in the game in that community. We'll go in there with our customer-driven focus, try and resolve the problems, and build rapport with that community so that you and your neighbor don't have to get into a tiff over something like lawn care or garbage cans.
So are you going to work closely with builders also that want to build into those communities?
It's possible if they still own the HOA portion of that and they want us to manage it, absolutely. But once again, for us, it's really about making sure we have the right HOA groups. Because if it's going to be a heavy-handed owner that just kind of wants to pick on the individuals there, we don't want to be a part of that. We want to be a very fair and balanced HOA management team that can go into that community and grow that community. And I wouldn't say appease everybody because stuff happens, but try and do it in the most politically correct possible way by going and communicating with the individual. And, you'd be surprised. You go and have a conversation with someone. You'd be surprised how they change just by building that rapport.
Can you talk a little bit about the service costs?
Depending on the level of service that you want for HOA, if you want something where it's fee-based and we're doing like a once a month running a meeting and recording the meeting minutes and sending out notices, there's one cost. Usually it's a couple $100 for a meeting, and I know that sounds like a lot, but when you look into sending notices out to all the tenants multiple times, being at the meeting with myself and another individual so that one can help you run the meeting, one can take notes during the meeting, and if necessary, record the meeting, and then of course all the post communications after that. And then it grows from there based on what you want. If you want us to manage vendors there, like lawn care, like if something breaks and we have a vendor go fix it, if you want us to manage the entire financial structure of the HOA, and on top of all that, if you want us to do any sort of CC&R enforcement, the cost grows. I would think in communities like Twin Falls, you would be seeing about $5 to $10 a month per house in that community would cover the cost of the whole gambit of all of the options you would have for HOA management.
Can you tell us why you decided to offer HOA management?
HOA management isn't currently offered by any group in Twin Falls. It's kind of a niche that'll help us build the ROI brand, and not just to build the brand, but also provide those customer service-driven focuses that we have in ROI. We want to get out in the community, we want to talk to people, and we want to make people feel comfortable where they're at. And the reality is we don't have a lot of experiences with HOA. And with as fast as Twin Falls is growing, we need a leader there that can help grow the HOA brand so that it's not looked at as like a dirty monster. It's looked at as a value add for our houses, because the reality is we put CCRs in place to be value add, to make sure that everyone's house looks nice and we get the best possible bang for our buck out of our property when we go to sell.
And what is the future of the HOA part of ROI?
I envision of having an entire team. It'd be really nice if we could automate it, like you have a Google car go around and just once a week it just takes pictures. But the reality is we don't have that luxury just yet. But I envision having a team that they fight over the fact that they get to drive around and just look at all the pretty houses in your HOA. I find it quite amusing because I can guarantee one day I'll be like, look, I don't want to work today. I'm going to go do the HOA inspection for HOA X over on, Y Street. It's a very relaxing type of situation where you just get to go and kind of chill and ultimately take pictures if there's infractions, or, just report to the HOA board, hey, we drove the community. You guys are doing a fantastic job keeping the community looking amazing. And then talk with other HOAs and see how they're doing it to bring best practices to all of the HOAs in the area.
So let's shift gears and talk a little bit about asset management. Can you explain what is asset management?
So asset management, they are the body between the owner and the property manager on large-scale projects like apartment and multifamily. And what they do is they're usually part of the investment group that dials in specifically around hiring the property manager, making sure the property is taken care of from a vendor perspective, and making sure that property performs. The reality is apartment complex, they're investments, and the owners want to make money off of an investment. I mean, that's kind of That's about as clear as you can get. So the asset manager goes in there with a certain performance that he wants that property to have based on what the investor's goals are. And there are cases where if a property doesn't have an asset manager, they don't perform the same. We call them, mom and pop apartment complexes. And the reality is that's what we look for to buy because they're generally not managed correctly. You get an asset manager in place, he holds the property manager accountable. And that property manager, in all intents and purposes, should be putting the right tenants in there and getting the wrong tenants out. They should be making sure vendors are taking care of that property, whether it's the utilities getting paid and services being rendered, or the lawn care being taken care of, or during a turn, making sure the walls are getting painted and painted right, making sure there's screens in the windows, making sure the door jambs are sealed. So if you get the right asset manager in there and that property manager is not performing, obviously you look for a property management change. But if they are performing, you continue to have those meetings with that property management team. And believe it or not, most property management companies want that interaction. They want to talk with the owners. They want an asset manager talking to them about the property because it shows ownership. A property management team doesn't just want you to forget about them. They want a little bit of capital to fix this. They want to have a conversation with you about that. And one of my favorite things to do as an asset manager is every year I get to go to each of these complexes and throw a barbecue. And it's time for me to get feedback from the tenants about the property management team, learn a little bit more about the property management team, and learn more about the property. And all three of those things are so very important when you're an asset manager to understand what you're managing.
And how do you hire vendors and property managers?
So in my background in IT, I was responsible for vendor management. I was responsible for hiring individuals. I hire property managers like I hire people. They go through an interview process. The last property manager I hired, she was actually really nervous when I interviewed her because she's like, oh, it's just another one of these guys that are coming out of the East Coast that are trying to fill a property manager position. He's going to ask all these weird questions. Well, the funny thing is me and Jennifer actually get along really well, and we have conversations just about every week on that property. And they actually did a complete 180. They're like, you are some of the best owners we have. You guys do an amazing job. You really care. And that's what we like to have in owner and asset managers is people that care. Our model is very much the Chick-fil-A model. We want to go to that property, uplift it, and make the tenants want to stay there. We want the tenants to refer their friends and family. We want to make it their home, not just an apartment complex. So the reality is we hire vendors and property management just like we would hire employees. We want them to work hard for us, we're going to work hard for them, and we're going to pay them well to do it.
So talk to us a little bit about P&Ls, rent rolls, distributions, and investor communications.
So the other part of the asset management role is to make sure that that property performs, whether it's managing the capital expenditures, making sure the rents are collected, making sure you have the right occupancy, talking about delinquency, etc. We go into those and we build reports. That way we can get them back to our owners and investors and let them know how that property is performing. And that's really important. Everyone wants to know if they're going to put some money into something, what it's being used for. So once again, we collect the financial information and we show that we're responsible owners of their financial data. Once they get those reports, like I love seeing the P&Ls for my investments. I get to read about the property. I get to read about some of the challenges they had and learn from them. I also get a sneak peek at some of the extra stuff that they've added to it that's made that property even better. And then, of course, distributions. So when you buy an investment property, it's not just about putting money into it long term. You're getting a portion of those rents too, and we call those distributions. Whether it's monthly, quarterly, or yearly, we pay those rents back to the owners. And we're not talking, a huge sum of money, but not a bad sum of money either. Usually looking at about 10 to 15% of what the rents collected were back to the owner after getting rid of your operating expenses. It's just another one of those value adds when you invest in a property to get some of your investment back.
So explain to us what is underwriting, CapEx, and CapEx management.
So underwriting, when you're looking at a deal, you want to know how it performs financially. When you look at the underwriting of a deal, generally what you're looking for is the T12 for the property. T12 stands for 12 months of the year of that property's financial statement. You take that information and you put it into, in this case, an Excel spreadsheet, and through the use of various formulas that you learn to use when you go through the underwriting process, you look at the performance of the property. And if the performance of that property is correct, that's when you know you want to buy it. If it's not correct, that's when you know it's probably not the deal for you and you need to walk away or find another way to add value add. When you go to buy a house, they do underwriting for that. They send it to their underwriting team to make sure that you're going to be able to pay for that house and it's not too much house. Same thing kind of with a car, only in a much smaller scale. They look at how much do you make a month, what you can afford, and if that car is the right fit for you in that regards. So underwriting is very, very important across multiple realms. But in this case, when it comes to apartment complexes, it's very complicated because you're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars over the course of the year and how that kind of goes into the deal. OPEX and CAPEX. So OPEX is the operational expenses that you have in a property over the course of a month, a quarter, and a year. And you take that data and build it out into that T12 we were talking about. So a T3 is 3 months, a T12 is 12 months, etc. You take all of the data and all the expenses and all the income that you make off those properties, you collect it in 1 month, and that's reporting data that you can send out. Or in our case, we do it in 3-month intervals. Capital expenses, which are also taxed very differently than operating expenses, are monies that you have raised specifically for uplifting that property to make that property have more value add or look better, basically. So if a roof needs to be replaced, you're not going to put that on your OPEX budget. You're not doing that every year. Operationally, if you're not doing that every year, probably not going to be on your OPEX budget. A plumbing issue, if it's small and you're just getting a plumber out there to snake, that's going to be maintenance. It's going to go on your OPEX. If you need to replace all the pipes in the building, that's going to be a capital expense because it's large and you don't do it very often, if at all. So once again, you put a new roof on a building, that's going to be capital expenses. And a lot of the times when you buy a building, you have a fairly large sum of money to put capital expenses into to uplift that property and bring it from its deteriorated state to a much better state, bringing in a better tenant base and, of course, uplifting the rents as well up to market value.
And how do you help manage OPEX and CAPEX?
So normally with a property, the property manager manages a lot of the operational expenses in the sense of paying the utility bills. We don't pay the bills. Paying the vendors for mowing the lawn. If there's maintenance items, paying the maintenance individuals, plumbing, electrical, one-offs, doing turns like paint and new floors, and sometimes even rehabbing the unit. The property manager will take care of that. We look at the report they give us, and if there's anything greater than that, like paying for your syndication software, paying your property taxes, making sure the insurance is getting paid for. And then once again, we put that all into a report. We give that to investors so they know what's going on for that year on that property.
Can you talk about how your work compares and is a contrast with your partners?
So in the last couple of deals, the partnership's been different each time. But my primary partner is the acquisition and investment raising. He does capital raising. He does acquisitions. So he'll go out and he'll source the property. And then we'll look at the underwriting together because two heads are better than one. So he'll put the underwriting together and he'll go, Kris, I want you to take a look at this. I want you to make sure my numbers meet. And we'll sit there and we'll play with the numbers back and forth and make sure the numbers are right. And actually, it's not just us that looks at the property. We also have other individuals that look at the property as well. Just because, once again, it's better to have more heads than one, just to make sure that property is going to perform the way we expect. And then, of course, there's the capital raising. When you buy apartment complexes like this, I can't just write a check. I've been doing it for 3 years and it's been good, but it's not been that good. So we go and we find like-minded individuals that want to invest in it. So for our side of it, because we're finding the acquisition, we're raising the money, we're doing the asset management, we get a general partnership bonus on the property in the sense of how the split is. And it depends if it's a joint venture, if it's a syndication, etc. But the general partners are the managing partners of that property in perpetuity until we sell it. So we don't make any money off of that until that property performs and is sold. If we don't do our jobs and it gets sold for the same price we bought it for, we don't make anything. Then there's the limited partners, and they're the ones that can go in, they can put, $100 down or $1 million down on that property and be a limited partner in that property and get returns off of that, which means when you borrow from the bank, their name is not on the loan. Our name generally is because we're the general partners. So there's no recourse debt, which means the bank isn't going to come after them should the investment fail, which in multifamily, it really doesn't fail unless there's something catastrophic. They also get returns, whether it's through refinance, selling, or through the monthly rent collections. And then they get those reports that the asset manager and the other managing partners put together for them. So once again, GP, LP, there's also the KP, and those are the guys that put their name and back the loan when it comes to buying the property, and that's recourse debt, meaning that the bank would go back to them and say, hey, we're repossessing this property, you owe us X amount of dollars, etc. All right, well, thank you, and this is Kris with ROI Asset and Property Management.